So the video we just saw really relates to the work that my panelists up here do. We're going to start by hearing from each of them, and at some point we'll open it up to questions from the audience as well. But the basic idea here is that low-income communities are facing this disproportionate energy burden. It's not even just that energy bills take up a larger percent of their household's budget, but they're actually paying more per square foot of their home. Can you guys talk about what we saw in the video, this energy burden, and how it relates to the work you're doing? We can just start at Michelle and work down the line.
Sure. The experience that Monet shared in the video is one that lots of people face. In the city of Baltimore, where she lives, almost 13% of all the families living below the poverty line are paying $200 plus per month for their electricity bills. Now that's a lot if you're not making very much money, but that's a lot, period. And it's really a call to action from our perspective. And we see the faith community, just like Reverend Wharton, as being critical partners in this. Not only because of the alignment with values to value, but also just like Reverend Wharton's church. In many communities, churches are really anchor institutions. You know, they're the places that you go when you don't have food to eat. They're the places that you go in the winter when your kids need a coat. And so to partner with the faith community is really fundamental to the neighborhoods, is an extraordinarily important way to reach out to people and help them understand not only what kind of opportunities there are to help them lower their bills, because in many cases there are a lot of programs, but they're just a challenge to work through. It's also an opportunity to really engage people about how clean energy can be a part of the solution for lowering their bills as well. And Jacqui and Ted also have extraordinary work that they're doing, particularly Ted here in DC with some of the success stories that they have.
And what is Groundswell's role in that relationship between communities and faith groups, and what is the other work you're doing? How does it play into this?
So Groundswell is a nonprofit. We build community power. We've been working since 2009 to engage low-income communities and small businesses and energy efficiency, including in partnership with DC Sustainable Energy Utility, working to help people move into cleaner wind power, where it provides them opportunities to save money. And most recently, we've launched a program in equitable community solar, to help low-income families and renters be able to participate in clean energy in a way that really builds community resilience, builds local economic strength and community wealth. But very importantly as well, and I think that this is something that we can't really miss when we think about the people, you know, who are challenged here, is it also just gives people more of a sense of agency. Because in energy, just like I think in so many things in our lives, you just kind of feel done to and extracted from all the time. You know, as a part of this broader narrative around economic equity and community solar like energy efficiency, but in a more visible kind of something you can feel way, you know, as a way that people can take more control, you know, over something that's costing them a whole lot more, and that also has very disproportionate public health impacts, which Jacqui has been extraordinarily important in articulating the story around.
So let's turn that over to Jacqui. Can you talk about what you're working on with these issues?
Yeah, sure. So we're working on addressing the intersection, as you said before, with the energy burden. There are kind of more than a few factors in terms of why the energy burden is greater for low-income communities. One is the housing stock and the fact that a lot of the energy, whether it's heat, leaves the facility because of, you know, whether it's windows, ceiling, and that kind of thing. And so then that makes higher costs. But then also, even in places where we all use kind of a similar amount of energy, then in some cases, obviously when the income is lower, then the ratio of cost to income is, you know, is greater. So that's where we see a couple of those factors. So we've been working on addressing everything from advancing energy efficiency so that folks have actual access to retrofits and weatherization that they need to be able to make their properties more energy efficient. We also have been working on this transition to clean energy because we do see it as an economic justice issue. We don't want to just see the situation be better for low-income people. We actually want to see a lifting of the income status of people as part of this agenda. So we explicitly see the distributed generation of energy and the fact that folks can actually own a part of our energy infrastructure as a key component of the work that we do. So we see that as asset building and wealth building at the individual and at the local level in the case of community solar.
Yeah. Ted, can you talk about what your work is here in the district and how it kind of intersects with what Michelle and Jacqui have discussed?
Sure. Thank you for having me this morning. Our work with the DC Sustainable Energy Utility has been going on here in the city for about 5 years. We are a contractor to the District Department of the Environment. And so what we do through that contract is operate the city's energy efficiency programs for natural gas, electricity, as well as the solar programs, primarily in low-income single-family solar installations, multifamily solar installations, as well as some commercial solar. But in addition to that, the work has a huge social equity component built into it, where we are training and delivering jobs for district residents in the green economy. 30% of our overall funding, we're funded by about $20 million a year here in the city. 30% of that funding is spent in the low-income community. We also have an emphasis on using local businesses to do the actual installation work, called certified business enterprises. But the magnitude of the problem that we're dealing with here is staggering, quite frankly.
Yeah.
In the District of Columbia, I'm proud to be a fourth-generation Washingtonian, we have over 22,000 families who are currently registered for heating assistance programs with the city, energy assistance programs. There are thousands of families who are just above the income qualification guidelines that struggle just as mightily with their bills here in the District of Columbia. So the numbers here in the city, I'm sure in Baltimore as well, are quite large. This isn't an isolated problem to a very small portion of our community. This is a large problem. We're sitting here probably within a mile of the nation's capital, our Capitol building. There are public housing units within a half a mile of a walk from here. So this is something that is right here in our midst, deeply embedded in the community. But the solar, the video you showed earlier and the lady getting the solar panels is interesting. We, for the last 5 years, have run a program where we install at no cost to the homeowner solar panels on the roof. This is not an easy sell. When you go up to somebody's door and you say, knock, 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 hey, we're here with some free solar panels, will you just let us in for 6 hours? That door slams. If you call them up on the phone, hey, we've got some free solar panels, the phone gets slammed down. They've been sold a bill of goods before and they don't believe that you're bringing essentially $12,000 worth of technology to them for free. That this is too good to be true, it can't be. And so what happens is you struggle in communities, and George Nichols is here in the audience, and he started this program with us 5 years ago. We thought that if we could go out with absolutely no marketing budget available, Groundswell was working with us to go and identify residents who would accept these solar panels. We thought at the end of the summer, if we could do 20 installations, we would declare success. I think we did about 87 that year. Last year, we installed 137. This year, we'll do somewhat over 140 sets of solar panels here in the District of Columbia. As well, in addition to that, we've probably done 5 times the installed capacity in the multifamily and commercial space. The interesting part for us was 5 years ago when we took a look at the District of Columbia and we mapped out all of the wards. In the wealthier sections of town, there are about 75,000 people in every ward here in the city. In some of the wealthier sections, you had 400 or 500 sets of solar panels per ward. But in Wards 7 and 8 combined, a total of 150,000 residents, there were less than a dozen sets of solar panels in that entire community. And so that's where we started.
That was 5 years ago.
5 years ago, that's where we started. The landscape now is evened out incredibly because we've installed over 500 sets of solar panels here in the District of Columbia, and all of those on single-family, low-income residences. But we still struggle, and we still have that hesitation to understand that this is really a deal that can significantly reduce the cost of electricity in the home by 30 to 50% on average, and that it can be provided free of charge. We have an incredibly robust SREC and tax situation here in the district.
Can you say what the SREC is?
Oh, sure. Solar renewable energy credits that are available in some states, not all, in the nation, but it is a very, very it's a helpful way to get solar panels installed here in the city and to make the District of Columbia's solar market one of the most robust in the nation.
Great. Jacqui, can you talk about how what Ted's saying fits in kind of nationally? What are you seeing region to region? How does the district kind of stack up?
Yeah, well, as Ted said, it really is quite progressive compared to some other places. There's certainly an increasing policy landscape that's supporting the proliferation of solar, but not at all going at in particularly distributed generation. But not in some places, it's very restrictive. There's a legislature that is actively pushing against distributed generation, and so we don't see the types of gains that we've seen in D.C. And other places where there is, whether it's California or New Jersey, these are places where there's actually been a pretty significant boom in terms of proliferation of distributed generation. So it varies quite a bit. And I wouldn't say, let's see, I'm trying to think regionally. I mean, out west, there's obviously a lot more in the way of available sun, but at the same time, in some of there's a lot of key battles in those places around net metering or distributed generation policies as a result, because I think some folks see it as too much too fast, and there's a concern about how the utility business model is going to be able to support this advancement. So.
Right. I mean, besides like the natural availability of sunlight, you have the policy landscape, and I'm sure that's pretty much controlling.
Right. It's interesting. Our parent company, Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, got started. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We got started in this business over 30 years ago, under the premise of just what you laid out earlier. The economic burden on low-income residents is much higher for utilities than it is for other residents. So we've run the statewide energy efficiency programs in Vermont, in several municipalities in Ohio, and we were operating these solar programs in New Jersey as well, with another state with a very, very robust solar market. But we like to say that our solar installed capacity here is probably the largest per capita low-income solar market on the East Coast. Wow. California has a very, very good program. I think you'll hear later on from Grid Alternatives that works both here and in California, and I think several other states as well.
If I could jump in as well and just share a perspective linking, because clearly the policy environment is incredibly important in shaping the opportunities to engage with communities, period. You gotta have something to go talk to people about, and that sets the play. But when we're talking about community engagement, and I think that also when we just observe how, this is a broad conversation about what some of the solutions might be for low-income families, but everybody's talking about solar up here, and I'm sure all y'all are thinking about solar out there too. There's an element of helping our neighbors, really to reduce their energy burden and have energy that's generated in a way that's doing justice to them and their bodies and their health. That's a people opportunity too. It's not just about policy, it's about people. And how do we create people-centric innovation, for communities of people who have been so done to, over time that they don't even believe you when you knock on the door and you're giving them $12,000 worth of solar panels. When you have people who are going to the church, to help them pay their utility bills, and people in many cases too who are working multiple jobs on hourly wages that are less predictable, on less predictable schedules, and don't have the time to invest in figuring all this stuff out themselves. I think one of the most interesting statistics to me in this whole space is something that Accenture came up with, I think last year. The average American, and talking about average anything is kind of misses a lot of important details, right? But the average American spends something like 9 minutes a year on their utility bill. 9 minutes a year interacting with their utilities, which is not much when you think about a cost that is 10% of the entire household income for the poorest families in this country. So there's an opportunity there to think about how do we really reach people, and how do we use the knowledge that we have and the connections that we have locally to help to solve these challenges. But in that too, there's another P word, partnerships that are incredibly important to bring to the table too, with the exception of NAACP. Up here, nonprofits like us, working primarily in the Mid-Atlantic, relatively small, when counting our customers in the thousands as compared to an institution like PG&E, which counts as customers in the millions. And so they're extraordinarily important opportunities for local place-based organizations who are closer to the community, who have that community trust, like NAACP chapters around the country, to be able to work together with bigger institutions like utilities, like the DC SEU, as a big nonprofit with their parent VEIC and partners with the local DOEE, DC Department of Energy and Environment, to get this good work out there. Because when we're talking about energy, when we're talking about clean energy in particular and efficiency technologies, they shouldn't be a luxury good. And it's really a basic necessity for quality of life, and I would argue even for civilization. And it's an opportunity for us to demonstrate that we're all in this together, solutions that we can work on in partnership.
We've spent a bit of time talking about solar, but you've also just brought up the importance of efficiency measures. I know DCSU is doing a lot on efficiency. Can you talk about your work on that end?
Sure. We operate about 12 different initiatives here in the District of Columbia to serve all of our customers, be they single-family customers, medium, small businesses, large commercial institutions, governmental institutions, hospitals, universities. But about 5 of those programs are specifically designed to meet the needs of the low-income community. Everything from distributing LED light bulbs through food bank programs to actually going into apartment buildings that are occupied and changing out the lighting, the water controls, furnaces, and things of that nature within unit by unit in the buildings. We probably serve about 15,000 residences per year through that program. Another program is called our Multifamily Comprehensive Program, where a lot of the older building stock has actually gone offline. We would like to go back in and return those older buildings to low to moderate income uses. And so during the rehabilitation of those structures, we will go in and help work with the construction companies to design energy efficient systems throughout the building. It's a comprehensive approach of air sealing, appliances, and the like. Lighting is what we call the low-hanging fruit, the mother lode. Everybody has lighting.
Yep.
And so really helping to transform those buildings in a way that when the occupants return to them, they are already suited for I think we brought online the first almost net zero multifamily building here in the District of Columbia. Just bought it online last year.
Wow,
so
where
there's
was
a lot
that?
of out of the very end of Benning Road.
Wow.
In Northeast. So there's a lot of innovation going on in this space right now. We're very proud to be at the forefront of it.
And it really goes to what Michelle was saying, that efficiency shouldn't be a privilege, especially when you're looking at it from a justice perspective of people who really are the least able to afford an inefficient home. I think at this point we'll turn it over to the audience for questions. I think we've got some people with holding mics, so they'll be, so any questions for our?
Yeah, hi, I'm Ethan Goffman with Earth Talk and the SSPP blog. My impression for a long time has been that the lowest hanging fruit was energy audits and sealing up buildings, and that once that's done, then you worry about solar, and especially with low income where you have a lot of buildings that might be leaking quite a bit. Is that still true because solar has come down so much? So it seems like, to me, that would be the priority, but maybe it's no longer the case. So.
No, Ethan, I think that the premise is correct. I would say that the lowest hanging fruit in the building after you're doing your energy audit, your audit is an analysis. Your audit is going to show you where the opportunities exist for energy efficiency in the building. I know we love to talk about solar because solar is sexy, but I think Ethan is right. When we get into these buildings, nobody calls you and says, "Hey man, come on over and see my new insulation," or
Right.
"I've got some pipe wraps going on here. You really need to see it." I can call you over to my house and show you my solar.
Exactly.
But you're right. We go in, and when we go in unit by unit into most of these buildings, that's what we're primarily dealing with first and foremost. Air sealing, replacing the faucet aerators, replacing the shower heads. Now, I know you're saying, well, that's attacking water. The less water you use, the less energy it takes to heat the water. So we're attacking the water problems. We're wrapping up exposed pipe. And these are things that are common to all of the units. We can even do this without the energy audits that Ethan is talking about. And so, but then when you get into a more comprehensive view, yes, it is good to have those audits. We have something called a benchmarking law here in the District of Columbia that kicked in about 2 to 3 years ago, which for the first time can actually show us on a comparative basis, building by building, per square foot, how much energy you are consuming here versus the building of the similar size right next door, how much energy they're consuming. And so when you go to the building owners and say, you know, Michelle, your building is consuming 3 times as much energy as the guys right next door, Michelle is now motivated to take action and cure some of the things that might ail her building. And so that benchmarking law, which has been passed in several cities now, I know New York started it, I think the District of Columbia was second, San Francisco has it as well, and Chicago. These are some of the things that are really helping us do those analytical pieces of the work on the buildings as well.
I would just add to your point that solar is sexy. I would just encourage us to think about solar and efficiency as a both and, as opposed to an either or, because there is that people component too. And because solar is something you can see and you can take pride in, and you can feel like you own a piece of that, whereas energy efficiency is kind of invisible and behind the walls. And sexy from a cost savings perspective, but hard to see. Sometimes solar, a starting point in a conversation around solar, is a way to engage people about their energy bill overall and get folks to understand that there are things and there are programs here in DC and Baltimore and different places around the country that can help lead them into lowering their utility bills. So whereas it might not be the most policy efficient economic solution, there's a human component of it that can really help to open up conversations that might otherwise be a little bit more challenging to have.
In the back.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Dell. I'm from the Department of Energy. An issue that has long faced low-income people in paying their utility bill. An issue that has long faced low-income Americans is service terminations in their utility. And so I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about what are the options or what people are thinking about to diminish the prevalence of service terminations and the threat of service terminations, given that even brief interruptions of utility service can have very serious impacts on family income, on the education of children in the family, on family health, things like that.
I have to comment on this briefly, and I'm going to pass this to my colleagues very quickly. I used to be the vice president of PEPCO here in the District of Columbia. I did that for 7 years, and in that role, not a week went by, often not a day went by, that I didn't get a phone call from a customer who was frantic, from a council member calling on behalf of a constituent who was facing a service termination. It is a really, really daunting experience when you have food in your refrigerator, when you have children in your home, to face the prospect of spending a night, forget the temperatures outside that can get extremely hot or cold at times here in the city, but just spending a night completely in the dark. And so the situation you present is very real. I'm going to turn this over to some of my colleagues to pitch in.
From our perspective, clearly the challenge that families face from service termination would be incredibly disruptive to lifestyle, would be incredibly disruptive to the economic and potentially health of families. If you look at some of the statistics around the impacts of energy insecurity, it includes impacts on communities that also have much higher rates of diabetes that of course require refrigerated medicine and all sorts of other health impacts. I think that when we look at the holistic landscape of how we respond to the needs of low-income communities with energy efficiency, with clean energy, and also in that spirit of partnership, how we think of utilities as resources that were really set up for the public good. I do believe that we have opportunities to be able to improve the delivery of programs that exist today, like the ones that Reverend Wharton talked about, like LIHEAP, that Ted mentioned, to make sure that people who are in need
Can you explain what that was?
LIHEAP, I don't know what the acronym stands for, but it's basically a low-income assistance program to help pay your bills. So that people who have that need are connected immediately to what the opportunities are. Because I think that there's tremendous good intention, And there are decades and decades of programs that have been developed from a technical perspective, from a policy perspective, to make sure people's basic needs are met. But the dots aren't always connected in terms of making sure that people at the local level and communities know what they have access to. The great work of the SCU, the great work of NAACP and its chapters, and many other organizations that you'll hear represented today have the ability to provide that connective tissue to the community to make sure that we are meeting people's needs, and that we can get a lot smarter about the policies from a human perspective. It's almost easier to do the economic analysis and the technical analysis to understand how it is to meet people's needs. But given the focus on this issue and the extraordinary turnout at the event today as an example of that, and the fact that one of the most progressive utilities chosen this week by Newsweek as the greenest utility in the country is here today sponsoring this, I think is an indication of what the potential is to being able to use this moment in time in our country when we're making this very significant energy transition to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our neighbors who are most in need.
And from the utilities perspective, as I sat there, it's your last resort. It's not the first thing you want to do. That is really the last thing you want to do, is a termination for a resident. You know the pain that causes. We feel it ourselves, and so it really is, as the lady said from the Department of Energy, it's the last resort. You don't want, it's the road you don't want to go down.
So I'll just add a little comment that on Friday we launched as the NAACP our first Energy Justice Certification Program, and we did it with a 2-day training that we'll be doing throughout the country in terms of 4 regional trainings. And in the context of that conversation, we had folks who were coming in from Hawaii, from Alaska, from Arizona, and all of the western states. And one of the persons was talking about a situation where she had a challenge with her utility company around a service interruption, and she just wasn't getting justice in that situation. She actually became an electrician, installed solar panels on her roof, and said, so these are the kind of ways, and as I said before, in terms of building wealth, building assets, and building autonomy and control, so you don't have someone who can flip a switch and make you, put you in the dark. And so we really see this as again, a justice issue.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much to my panelists up here. That's all the time we have for this morning. It's been great speaking with you, and thank you to the audience too.
Thank you.
Thank you.